Over a span of 5 years, more than 80 violent attacks and at least 14 homicide plots were authorized from inside California's prison system. Sometimes, just a small piece of paper was enough to turn an ordinary person into a target. And the most chilling part? The ones giving the orders never left their isolation cells. This is a look at the 10 most dangerous leaders of Nuestra Familia. Where are you watching this from? Let us know in the comments below. Number 10. Sheldon "Skip" Villanueva. In June of 2016, a federal memorandum from Northern California listed Sheldon "Skip" Villanueva among the individuals under special monitoring by federal authorities. Investigators described his role in one short sentence. He made sure Nuestra Familia's orders were carried out exactly as intended. Even when the men giving those orders were locked behind concrete walls. Skip was born and raised in Northern California, where the color red and the number 14, symbols of the Norteño identity, were seen everywhere, from schoolyards to neighborhood walls. According to court documents, he joined Nuestra Familia in the late 1980s, during the organization's restructuring after years of conflict with the Mexican Mafia. At first, he served as a lower-level member responsible for maintaining discipline inside the housing units. But within NF, those who could keep secrets and quietly enforce orders often rose faster than those who made noise on the yard. By the 1990s, as many senior La Mesa leaders were placed in solitary confinement at Pelican Bay, Skip became a key communication link. Later records described him as a bridge between the streets and the prison system, passing coded notes, coordinating financial flows, and relaying disciplinary directives. Agents working on Operation Black Widow referred to this network as the second pipeline, the hidden route that allowed NF to keep functioning even when its top command was sealed off. One incident cited in the files took place in 2008, when an inmate suspected of sharing information with rivals was attacked inside the prison. At first, it looked like a personal dispute, but after investigators reviewed confiscated contraband phones and letters, they concluded that Skip had prior knowledge and had allowed the attack to proceed. In Nuestra Familia's world, failing to stop an attack could still count as official approval. By 2016, federal agents were tracking how NF had adapted to a new era. Street regiments in Salinas, San Jose, and the Central Valley were still sending in money, and Skip was described as one of the men authorized to validate or remove local representatives. That made him part of a shadowy inner layer known as the Overseers, a supervisory group so discreet that even many NF members didn't know who belonged to it. What worried investigators most wasn't that Skip had personally committed violent crimes. The threat was subtler. He ensured the organization never stopped running. When an older leader was taken away, he made sure another stepped in. When someone on the outside became a liability, he monitored how that problem was handled. Sheldon "Skip" Villanueva proved a simple but chilling truth. A criminal organization doesn't need to show its guns to stay dangerous. All it needs is one quiet man, patient, discreet, and capable of keeping the system alive, no matter how many times it's been struck down. Number 9. Gerald Cuete Rubalcaba. In early 1998, inside the security housing unit at Pelican Bay State Prison, a short message was passed in a way that only prison gangs understood. A small, folded piece of paper with just a few words. The person marked for punishment was Robert Brown Bob Viramontes, a former member accused of breaking discipline. According to court records, Gerald Cuete Rubalcaba was the one who approved that order. A command issued from inside prison walls could easily lead to a violent attack on the streets. Rubalcaba was part of La Mesa, the governing body of Nuestra Familia during its time inside Pelican Bay. His role was not to carry out attacks himself. Instead, he was described as overseeing internal security and discipline. Any report of misconduct from below went through him, and any disciplinary decision came back down from him. In official documents, this position was known as the Regimental Security Department, or RSD. Nuestra Familia operated like a structured enterprise. Street regiments collected a percentage from drug trafficking, robberies, and extortion. That money was then sent back to support members in custody, maintaining loyalty and keeping the criminal network active. When someone stepped out of line, the RSD was notified. Some were warned. Others, like in the case of Viramontes, faced authorization for violent retribution, all in the name of organizational control. In 2001, Operation Black Widow brought a wave of federal indictments against Nuestra Familia's leadership at Pelican Bay. Prosecutors said that even while confined, the group continued to operate as a functioning criminal organization, assigning territories, issuing kill orders, and keeping the cash flowing. Rubalcaba was identified as one of the key figures behind those internal decisions. Evidence presented in court included coded letters, internal communications between housing units, and financial trails connecting outside associates. Investigators emphasized that isolating NF leaders in maximum security didn't stop their influence. It only made their communication more secretive. Between 2004 and 2005, many of the defendants in Operation Black Widow either pled guilty or were convicted. Rubalcaba and 4 other senior members received life sentences after prosecutors argued their leadership directly contributed to organized violence and long-term community harm. Following the trial, Rubalcaba was transferred to ADX Florence, the federal supermax prison in Colorado. The goal was to separate NF's command structure from California's prison system, cutting off their influence. Still, law enforcement officials continued to describe Nuestra Familia as an organization capable of sustaining its structure, even when its top figures were buried deep inside the nation's most secure facility. The story of Kuwait highlights a grim reality about prison gangs. Some of the most dangerous decisions are made by people who never step outside their cells. One command from a prison cell can lead to bloodshed on the streets, and that's what investigators fear the most. Number 8. Joseph Pinky Hernandez. In September 2005, during a federal sentencing hearing, the judge slowly read the name Joseph Pinky Hernandez while announcing life sentences for 5 leaders of Nuestra Familia. He wasn't a well-known figure to the public, but inside NF, Pinky was the man who kept the money moving. According to prosecutors in Operation Black Widow, Nuestra Familia functioned like a criminal business. Drug profits fueled the organization, and the organization protected the flow of that money. Pinky occupied the position that ensured this financial cycle never stopped, even when the leadership was locked behind concrete walls. Court records showed that from inside the security housing unit at Pelican Bay, Pinky received reports from every street regiment. Each local group was required to send a share of its revenue, from meth, heroin, extortion, and even some legitimate fronts. The money was passed through relatives and intermediaries, split into smaller sums to conceal its final destination, the imprisoned leadership. Prosecutors said this steady stream of payments was what kept Nuestra Familia dangerous. No matter how far one of their leaders was sent, or how many steel doors closed around them, the flow of money kept their command alive. Among the evidence presented in court, Pinky was also accused of approving funds for attacks against members seen as disloyal. There was no claim he carried out the violence himself, but his money was linked to it. In NF's system, financial control could be just as deadly as physical violence. After his 2005 sentencing, Pinky Hernandez was transferred to ADX Florence, where communication between inmates is strictly limited. Yet even there, traces of his influence surfaced later. In 2013, according to court documents, his wife Huerta was convicted of transferring money and passing coded messages on his behalf. One transaction, $300 sent to Florence in May 2006, was listed by name in the records. Small as it was, it proved that the organization's financial veins were still open. There was never a statement calling Pinky the most violent man in Nuestra Familia, but the numbers told a different story. Wherever NF's money continued to flow, organized crime risks remained high. Prison walls can lock people in, but they can't always lock money out. And Pinky Hernandez understood that better than anyone, using it to keep the organization alive. In the world of Nuestra Familia, some men are remembered for violence. Pinky is remembered for ensuring the money always found its way back to power. Number 7. Cornelio "Corny" Tristan. A later court record noted that a regiment operating in San Jose had been created under direct orders, and that the wife of Cornelio "Corny" Tristan was receiving part of the proceeds collected from that area. That single detail revealed exactly how Nuestra Familia continued to operate even while its leaders were held in isolation. Orders coming from inside prison, money returning to the families of high-ranking members, and the organization remaining active despite maximum security confinement. Tristan was part of La Mesa, the upper command tier of Nuestra Familia during its years inside Pelican Bay. According to investigation files, his role involved financial oversight, regional coordination, and maintaining unity between imprisoned and free members. To keep the money flowing, NF required every street regiment to contribute a percentage of its income, from drug sales, robberies, and extortion, even from certain legitimate businesses used as fronts. That system ensured outside members were never truly separate from the organization. They had financial obligations, and failing to meet them carried serious consequences. In that context, Operation Black Widow in 2001 struck directly at the NF command housed in Pelican Bay. The indictment stated that men like Tristan continued issuing orders related to violence, finances, and personnel. Federal agents described an elaborate communication network using handwritten notes, visitation channels, and family contacts. A single command from Pelican Bay could quickly turn someone on the outside into a target. By September 2004, many defendants in Operation Black Widow pled guilty under RICO, confirming that NF functioned as an organized criminal enterprise with structure and intent. 1 year later, in September 2005, 5 top leaders received life sentences. Prosecutors argued they had approved violent acts, directed robbery and drug operations, and maintained the gang's command system from within prison walls. After sentencing, Tristan was transferred to ADX Florence, where inmates are kept in near-total isolation. Yet authorities did not consider Nuestra Familia neutralized. Street regiments, once overseen by Tristan, remained active long enough to show how deeply rooted the organization had become. To dismantle it completely would require years of continued control and enforcement. Corny was not a public figure, but it was men like him who kept NF stable, managing money, enforcing discipline, and ensuring consequences were delivered. He became a prime example of a criminal strategist who controlled a system, rather than simply committing acts of violence himself. A life sentence did not end the network overnight. It only changed the way the organization continued to operate. Number 6. James Tibbs Morato. In September 2005, when the court read out life sentences for 5 leaders of Nuestra Familia, the first name mentioned was James Tibbs Morato, not because he sought the spotlight, but because investigators saw him as the perfect example of the kind of prison leader they were targeting, someone who didn't need to walk the streets to command them. Morato had been part of Nuestra Familia since the 1970s and 80s, a period when the gang restructured itself inside California's prisons. By the late 1990s, while housed in the security housing unit at Pelican Bay, Morato was still described as a general, a top decision-maker within the organization. According to prosecutors, he oversaw narcotics distribution, robberies, and internal punishments against anyone perceived as a threat to NF authority. During Operation Black Widow in 2001, Morato became one of the central figures of the investigation. The indictment detailed how NF's leadership operated a command network from inside solitary confinement. Orders were written in coded notes, passed through visiting rooms, family members, or indirect channels that were nearly impossible to monitor. What happened inside the SHU did not stay inside, and that was why Operation Black Widow became a federal priority. By 2004, Morato and several others pled guilty under RICO. Each admitted involvement in at least 2 homicides committed under their supervision of NF operations. 1 year later, they received federal life sentences without parole. The goal of those sentences was clear: to sever the chain of command they had maintained for decades. Morato was then transferred to ADX Florence, the highest security prison in the United States, where inmates spend about 23 hours a day in isolation. Authorities believed only complete separation from the California prison network could finally limit his influence. Yet even under those extreme conditions, one question remained. Could a man who had spent decades building a power structure simply let go of it? For investigators, James Tibbs Morato represented the enduring threat of Nuestra Familia, leadership that didn't need public fame, didn't need visibility, and could still shape behavior across the system through loyalty alone. Morato's story serves as a stark reminder. A gang leader can be locked in isolation, but as long as the structure remains, the power never truly disappears. Number 5. Robert Brown Bob Viramontes. On the afternoon of April 19, 1999, in a quiet neighborhood in Campbell, California, Robert Brown Bob Viramontes was watering the flowers in his front yard. He had recently been released from prison and was trying to rebuild his life, covering up the large Nuestra Familia tattoo on his back and speaking to local youth about leaving gang life behind. That was when a Ford Explorer stopped in front of his home. 2 men stepped out. Moments later, multiple gunshots rang out. Inside the house, his wife and child had no time to understand what was happening. According to investigative reports, this was no random shooting. Viramontes had once been a La Mesa commander within Nuestra Familia, part of the organization's old leadership circle. He was respected, experienced, and deeply familiar with the group's inner workings. But after his release, he refused to return to the gang business. Within the unwritten rules of NF, that made him a threat, a man who knew too much but no longer served the organization. At the time, investigators told reporters that the order to handle him came from Pelican Bay, where NF's top leaders were held in the security housing unit. They considered Viramontes a defector. The order traveled out of prison and was allegedly overseen on the streets by Antonio Chuco Guillen. The shooters were identified as David Dreamer Escamilla and Santos Bad Boy Bernius, while Albert Beto Avila drove the getaway car. All of them later pled guilty in cases linked to the NF network. The way Viramontes lost his life showed how Nuestra Familia enforced loyalty, not just through threats, but through real-world examples. To them, walking away meant betrayal. Even from solitary confinement, more than 350 miles away, prison leaders still issued deadly orders that were carried out without hesitation. When Operation Black Widow launched in 2001, the Viramontes case became one of its key examples, proof that NF was operating as a structured criminal enterprise. It showed that leadership inside prison was still directing targeted violence on the outside. The guilty pleas that followed in the years after only reinforced that conclusion. To his neighbors, Viramontes was just a man trying to start over. But in the eyes of Nuestra Familia, the past is something you never truly leave behind. No court ever called him a hero. No news story romanticized his choices. Yet the killing of Robert Brown Bob Viramontes revealed a harsh truth. Leaving a violent organization can sometimes be harder than joining one. And what happened in his front yard that day was a stark reminder. In NF's world, freedom does not always mean safety. Number 4. Vincent Gerald Chente Garcia. Inside Monterey County Jail, every inmate knows one rule. If you get jumped the moment you enter the pod, it's not random. It's a removal. The punishment for violating Nuestra Familia's internal code. According to a federal indictment, many of those removals were approved by Vincent Gerald Chente Garcia from within the jail itself. Garcia served as the regiment commander for NF in Monterey County between 2012 and 2014. Federal agents described him as the one holding absolute authority inside the housing unit, deciding who stayed, who was expelled, and who had a voice among the Norteño population behind bars. According to the Department of Justice for the Northern District of California, Garcia personally authorized at least 10 removals during that time. Court documents detailed the method. Hitters would rush in first, stabbing the target with improvised weapons. Bombers followed, throwing punches to create chaos and conceal who held the blade. The attack was over in seconds, before staff could intervene. Targets often included inmates suspected of cooperating with rivals, speaking to opposing gangs, or simply disobeying NF orders. These swift and public assaults served as a warning. One mistake could cost you your place or your life. Beyond enforcing discipline, Garcia also managed NF's financial network inside the jail. Drugs were smuggled in, sold to other inmates, and profits were funneled through coded calls, letters, and family intermediaries. For Nuestra Familia, prison walls were only physical barriers, not limits to power. His actions led to overlapping prosecutions. 2015, state case. Under Operation Snake Eyes, Garcia received 35 years to life for leading NF operations in the region. 2022, federal case. He was convicted of RICO conspiracy and violent crimes inside the facility, including attempted homicide, assault with weapons, and racketeering leadership. In November 2022, he was sentenced to 306 months in federal prison. In 2025, an appellate court upheld the entire verdict. Prosecutors emphasized that the danger wasn't just in the violence itself, but in the system Garcia maintained. Violence had procedure. Authority came from approval, not muscle, and those approvals extended far beyond the jail walls, shaping behavior in entire communities. For investigators, Vincent Chente Garcia embodied a central truth about Nuestra Familia, the ability to inflict harm even under the tightest confinement. All it took was one signal, one decision, and a few seconds of action where no one expected it. Number 3. David D.C. Cervantes. In June of 2025, at the Northern District Federal Court of California, David D.C. Cervantes received a sentence of 120 months in prison for his leadership role within Nuestra Familia. What stood out most was that Cervantes wasn't a young or impulsive street figure. He was described as one of 3 generals, the organization's highest decision-making tier, the ones who decided who lived, who was punished, and how the organization moved forward. To understand this sentence, we have to look back to the period between 2013 and 2019, when NF was rebuilding after major federal crackdowns. With many older leaders transferred out of the California prison system, Cervantes became one of the central voices within the General Council, the group responsible for approving or rejecting all acts of violence. According to prosecutors, the incidents tied to him were not random attacks. They were part of an internal control mechanism meant to preserve order, loyalty, and revenue. The indictment listed at least 14 targets identified for removal during that period. Among them were several confirmed assassination plots and numerous assaults targeting disloyal members, defectors, or anyone seen as a threat to NF stability. 3 names were highlighted in public court documents: Lorenzo Lencho Guzman, attempted homicide in 2015; John Shanks Reyna, attempted homicide in 2019; and Antonio Sombras Villagrana, along with other aborted murder plots. Most of these orders were traced to Kings County Jail, where Cervantes had been incarcerated for years. Federal agents described a network of handwritten notes, contraband cell phones, and family intermediaries that funneled commands to street regiments. Some attacks took place inside prisons, others unfolded on the streets, all with the same purpose: enforcing discipline and protecting NF's financial interests. In September 2021, a federal grand jury indicted 17 individuals connected to Cervantes' command network. After a 12-week trial in October 2024, the jury found him guilty of RICO conspiracy and murder-related offenses. Despite his position as a general, the 10-year sentence drew attention, partly because of complex legal factors and the inclusion of time already served. Cervantes never sought the spotlight like some of NF's earlier leaders, but law enforcement viewed him as the embodiment of the organization's modern face: quieter, less flamboyant, yet far more systematic. This wasn't street chaos. It was coordinated management. Every decision was calculated to preserve authority and revenue. The 120-month sentence did not mark the end of Nuestra Familia, but it did signal a shift, a void at the very top. And for an organization built on commands from behind bars, one question now lingers: who will step in to make the decisions that only 3 men were ever allowed to make? Number 2. Antonio Chuco Guillen. On April 19, 1999, in Campbell, California, Robert Brown Bob Viramontes was watering his front lawn. A Ford Explorer slowed to a stop. 2 men got out, raised their guns, and opened fire. Viramontes fell where he stood, within sight of his wife and child. But the man overseeing the hit, the one who made sure the order was carried out, never pulled the trigger himself. Investigators identified him as Antonio Chuco Guillen. According to Santa Clara County records from 1999, Viramontes had once been a senior La Mesa commander of Nuestra Familia. After his release, he covered his NF tattoo and tried to walk away. But within NF culture, leaving meant betrayal. The execution order originated from Pelican Bay, where the leadership was being held in isolation. Chuco's task was to ensure that order was carried out, no questions asked. Moments after the shooting, authorities pursued a high-speed chase on Highway 101. Chuco was behind the wheel, driving at 80 miles per hour, with one of the shooters inside before being arrested. The case became a textbook example of how NF punished perceived defectors, with ruthless precision and strict obedience to prison-issued directives. But the story didn't end in the 90s. 2 decades later, Antonio Chuco Guillen resurfaced, not as a forgotten relic, but as one of the modern General Council members still authorizing orders from inside Pelican Bay. Federal investigators reported that removal and green light directives continued to be handwritten and signed by Chuco, smuggled out in tiny coded notes known as kites. In 2021, a federal grand jury indicted 17 individuals within NF's leadership structure. Among them was Chuco, listed beside other high-ranking members accused of ordering or approving targeted assaults and murder plots in 2015, 2019, and beyond. The Department of Justice classified those cases as part of an organized series of violent conspiracies, designed to maintain control and prevent leaks of information. By 2025, 26 years after the killing of Viramontes, Chuco remained at the heart of the story, still identified as an active shot caller, despite being incarcerated the entire time. For investigators, it underscored a troubling truth. Nuestra Familia doesn't just exist on the streets. It survives through the authority of men who have never left their cells. Chuco was never a legendary figure. He had no massive tattoos, no famous quotes, but his role left an unmistakable mark. He was the man who turned a neighborhood shooting into official gang policy. Number 1. Sammy Luna. In June of 2025, news outlets across Northern California reported that several top figures of Nuestra Familia had just been sentenced to prison, with terms ranging from 120 to 175 months for RICO violations. Viewers scanning through the list saw familiar names, men who had run the NF structure for decades. But buried in the 2021 indictment, there was one name most outsiders had never heard before: Sammy Luna. There were no bold headlines, no nostalgic stories from the 1990s, not even an easily found photo online. Yet, according to the Department of Justice, Luna was one of 7 members of the General Council, the supreme decision-making body of Nuestra Familia between 2013 and 2019. This council didn't get its hands dirty. It decided who would be attacked, who would be killed, and who would be allowed to continue dealing narcotics under the organization's banner. Court documents stated clearly that Luna and his co-defendants directed NF operations from within prison walls. They didn't need to be on the streets. They didn't need to hold a weapon. All it took was one decision, sent out through a smuggled phone call, a coded letter hidden in a shoe sole, or a small slip of paper marked with symbols. That single message could spark an assassination attempt anywhere Norteños operated. By 2024, judges were reviewing evidence tied to 14 targeted attacks authorized between 2015 and 2019. Each order shared a common motive: the protection of the organization. Some targets were suspected traitors. Some had refused to pay the tax. Others had crossed into rival territory. Every decision reinforced a hierarchy built on fear, a hierarchy that Luna himself helped authorize. But Nuestra Familia's power was never just about violence. Money was its lifeblood. The 2021 indictment also charged Luna and his associates with 2 separate meth distribution conspiracies, one in 2019 and another between September 2020 and March 2021. Drug profits paid those willing to enforce orders and bought loyalty inside prison walls. Sammy Luna was not the kind of figure you'd picture when thinking of an old-school gang leader. He wasn't known for shootouts or street legends, but that's exactly what made him so dangerous in the eyes of prosecutors. His power didn't come from violence. It came from the authority to approve it. So when people ask, who's really running Nuestra Familia today? The federal answer in 2025 doesn't point to the past. It points to men like Sammy Luna, the quiet successors, less visible but just as strategic, keeping alive a system of violence and profit that has endured for more than 50 years. A criminal organization doesn't die when its old leaders fade away. It survives as long as there's someone ready to inherit the power to command. And the rise of Luna within the General Council proves one unsettling truth. Even when we think Nuestra Familia is weakening, there's always another man waiting to take the seat of authority.